That's good. I'd like to talk about the EPA and Obama's attempt to have them take over another aspect of our life and have them regulate CO2 levels. And a lot of this, of course, was focused on power plants and the like. And as you know, they're looking at Obama was talking how wonderful clean coal was when he was being elected. And there really isn't too much going on in clean coal. Every time you burn something, you produce, depending on what's in what you're burning, either CO2 or water. And things that contain a lot of carbon produce a lot of CO2. Things that contain a lot of hydrogen produce more water. That's the reason why they are excited about the hydrogen technology, where you can use electrolysis and separate water into two components: the hydrogen and the oxygen. The problem is that the burning hydrogen has a tendency to make metal crack in the combustion chambers, and it does some really strange things. And of course, probably the exhaust system would be in pretty bad shape. But there is always a certain amount of water generated when you burn gasoline, anyhow, and you can see it in the exhaust coming out the tailpipe in the wintertime. In fact, the early dirigibles that the Germans built actually tried to condense out the water vapors from the exhausts to cut down the rate at which the dirigible was losing weight, so they didn't have to vent as much gas. But getting back on subject, Mr. Obama was really trying to get the EPA to control CO2 levels or emissions and deal with it appropriately. Now, I am sitting here at rest, maybe a little excited about giving this video, but essentially I'm consuming very little oxygen. In fact, I'm not even aware that I'm breathing, like most of you are when you're watching TV, things like that. As you know, the amount of oxygen you consume relates obviously to the amount of CO2 you exhale. And the more aggressive your activity, the more CO2 you exhale. So these social planners like Mr. Obama, who said he was for clean coal, in theory could actually say, hey, we don't want you going through the hills because you're using up more than your allotment of CO2. You could also say that, hey, that big pickup truck of yours, you're creating too much CO2 with that big pickup truck. The fact you're paying a lot more in fuel taxes than the other person who's getting 40, 50 miles a gallon in a hybrid, and you're getting 10 miles per gallon, you would think that would be something. One thing you should be aware of on this clean coal is that one of the technologies they're thinking about doing is essentially taking the exhaust gas and pumping it down deep in the bowels of the earth, and the CO2 will absorb in the moisture and various rocks and stuff, almost like carbonated soda. And somehow it's going to stay down there, whether or not it will ever erupt up and kill everybody. I don't know if they know that, but irregardless, the amount of energy they will use to do this will increase the amount of coal they need to produce the same amount of energy. So this technology will deplete our coal quicker. It'll mean there'll be more strip mining, and they don't want to talk about the environmental damage that will be caused by using more coal than we want to. Now, the other interesting thing is that we'll burn more coal, which means we will use more oxygen, and the CO2 won't go back into the environment so that the plants can convert it. They do know that the higher the concentration of CO2 to a certain point, the greater the plant growth, the faster the plant growth. In fact, when they were doing some calculations as to what the CO2 levels should be, they kind of were puzzled because the CO2 levels were not going up as fast as they thought. That's because with the higher CO2 levels, the more plant growth developed, and the more converted the plants the CO2 into oxygen, back into oxygen. Now, the other misnomer is that some plants, and I guess it depends on the latitude and longitude, or the latitude, I should say, actually create more CO2. They actually raise the CO2 levels, and this comes into effect that when a plant dies, it rots, and in the process of rotting, it creates CO2 and methane, depending how it breaks down, whether bugs are eating it up or it's rotting, and like sewage, and producing methane. So all these people who are worried about methane and CO2 levels, they seem to love these wetlands, and wetlands are tremendous generators of these terrible gases. But you see, these gases are only terrible if they're man-made, or if they improve our standard of living. They're not terrible if they're just natural events, which is very interesting. But anyhow, this EPA trying to take over controlling CO2 levels is very draconian, very scary, Orwellian, I guess you'd say. One thing I was surprised at is that my Senator Casey, Robert Casey, actually voted against Obama. He actually was not in lockstep with him, although he did vote for the mandatory health insurance, which makes me a slave. At least I can say my hat's off to him for at least voting against the EPA being involved in this. Now, whether or not he will eventually vote for cap and trade, which is another scam to make the bankers richer and richer and richer, I don't know, but at least he showed some good face in the voting against the EPA and voting against Obama in what this SOB is trying to do. So that's what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about the EPA intervening in your lives. CO2 is not a toxic gas. It's not like sulfur, or it's not like some other emissions. One thing you should be aware of, that when they didn't have scrubbers on the power plants and sulfur was going into the air, that downstream the crops grew better, and they were more nutritious. You need sulfur in your food to get the most out of it. That is the problem with our agriculture today. There's so fewer and fewer minerals in the food that it becomes less and less nutritious. And any of the farms downwind of the power plants benefited from the emissions of sulfur. In fact, because that effect doesn't happen anymore, or much less, they are forced to actually buy sulfur and throw it in the soil. So that's something I thought was very, very interesting. Now, what I find very interesting is a lot of the environmentalists don't seem to care about their own bodies, and they basically are talking environmental, and yet they're smoking, drinking, whatever, doing all kinds of drugs. So it's okay if they pollute their own body, but they want to tell me how to live. These are the same people who are forcing mandatory health insurance on me. I do try to live fairly healthy, and yet they want to tell me that I have to help fund them for their unhealthy lifestyles. But that's another issue. That's another YouTube. I've covered this before. We are living in some very strange times, and we do have a chance to get this country back. Whether it's too late, I don't know. But you cannot negotiate with terrorists, and that's what we have essentially in office. We cannot allow them or trust them to say what they're going to do, because Obama said he was against mandatory health insurance when he was running for office, and now I'm forced to find some way of paying for this insurance, taking out of my savings, and altering my lifestyle so I can't afford healthier foods and vitamins. So that's the deal. I want you to be so proud of Mr. Obama for ruining this nation. What a guy, huh? Take care.